All right, well, we're so lucky to have with us today the CEO of We Recycle Solar, Adam Sagi. He's calling in from Yuma, Arizona. Thank you so much for joining us today, Adam.
Thank you for having me.
So I love that your company has what you do right in the title. We Recycle Solar. That is so awesome. But let's try and explain to everyone out there what we're actually talking about here. What is it that you guys do?
So pretty self-explanatory from a first glance, but yet it is a little more complicated because we do several different things within end of life. And so one of them being obviously the recycling of solar panels. And the other portions would be resale, refurbishment and resale, and decommissioning of solar farms on a commercial scale.
So, I mean, I think a lot of us understand that as new technology comes along, we get better, efficient solar panels, that if I owned a big solar farm, I might want to take all those panels, get rid of them, bring in the new stuff. You guys take the old panels, but now here's an exciting part, right? I kind of first thought, oh, well, they just throw them in a giant grinder or something like that. But there's a couple steps. Can you kind of walk us through that?
Absolutely. So it starts with the 3 R's. Back in the 70s, it was a term that was coined: reduce, reuse, recycle. And at every turn, we look to go through that second R, which is reuse. And reuse really starts with when the modules come into our facility. How can we at every turn get reuse? Because that always uses less resources, right? As far as energy consumption, labor, etc. And a lot of what we see are perfectly good panels that can be put into use. There are many people out there that would love to get their hands on usable renewable energy.
And so when we're talking about modules, you're saying solar panels themselves. They've been sitting out in a field somewhere, nice and quietly in some beautiful, just getting shined down on, generating electricity for, months and maybe years. And then, like Zach was saying, a company's going to do kind of a cost benefit analysis and say, okay, well, the panels that we bought, 5 years or 10 years ago, are say, 200 or 250 watt panels. We could spend some money, some capital, to put in higher efficiency panels. So for the same size, you could generate, say, 350 watts, or maybe even 400. There's some I heard that getting into really crazy high numbers. And so they're going, we could almost double our output in the same amount of area. So for the same amount of space that we either own or lease, we could be generating more electricity, and it'll actually make us more money to swap those out. And then what you're doing, what your job is they call you up and say, hey, we have all these, thousands of solar panels and we want to get rid of them. And now what you're saying is, instead of how we use most things in our lives where we say, oh, this is a thing and whoa, throw that away. We don't need that anymore. You're not throwing them away. You actually are trying to reuse them.
Absolutely. So one of the things that we always talk about here and amongst the circle that I associate with is the story of stuff, right? We all have a lot of stuff, and I'll use the comparison with your cell phones. Look, do you need a new iPhone 47? No. The last version will do just fine. But within the conversation, within the energy space, in real estate and how that plays into that net effect, there's newer technology, it's more efficient, and when end of life planning happens, one of the key things is there is a reuse play to all of this. And just like your phone, the majority, let's use that example for a second, your cell phone, ultimately it is going to India and they don't mind having a iPhone 4, 5, 6. They're perfectly fine with it. The infrastructure that's built out and how they're using that type of technology, it suits them. It's just, maybe we're kind of greedy and we want, high pixel, you want our Instagram to look a little bit better. So with solar panels, this asset owners and with a lot of folks in the space, they do want better efficiency. They want to, especially on rooftop applications, get the most for that square footage. But there is a solution. There is a way to do that upgrade, help a emerging market or people within need for that energy. And why not, as they say, kill two birds with one stone?
And so when they take these solar panels off of the solar farm, and I mean, it's a pretty simple operation to do that. It's probably like a couple screws or, you unlatch a couple things and you can unplug it and kind of stack them up. then what? I mean, are we going to ship these, are we shipping these to India? Are we shipping them to Africa or the Antarctica? What are we doing with them? Do we have to kind of get rid of them, kind of like a lot of our other waste, like you're saying, almost with phones, like, oh, we have to send it to kind of a developing nation or something, or can we use them right here?
So that's a great question. One of the things that obviously we are looking to do is, with some of the things that we saw within the supply chain issues, woes that we saw during COVID, we couldn't get anything. And so what that taught the consumer was refurbished items, secondhand overstock is a great fit. And so a lot of people within the solar community took advantage of that. They did buy overstock, secondhand panels to fill in that gap because it wasn't available. So that trend is happening more and more, and people are becoming accustomed with getting, going to the secondary market. So there is plenty of demand within the US. I think that it's a bigger conversation as we're seeing some of the lower watt material, maybe that's not so appealing. As I mentioned, that iPhone 4, that with real estate costing what it does overseas, 5 acres in sub-Saharan Africa is a lot less than, say, in downtown Atlanta or even Yuma, for that matter. So I think what happens is there's definitely, at first glance, there's definitely a demand here in the States. But some of the more problematic material, some of the material that's a little lower wattage, we can find homes overseas for.
I want to talk about that kind of. I think we haven't discovered yet this demand. I feel like there's municipal buildings like schools. I feel like there's commercial buildings, like look at all the strip malls that are out there, right, with big flat roofs. And there's residences, people like me who could build, we're about to build a solar carport because we found out that used solar panels are cheaper than plywood.
But whoa, Zach, hang on. This stuff is used. Would you buy a used car? Hang on,
yes.
It's going to be worn out, right? A car is going to be all worn out. And so like, what do I have to do to get a solar panel, a used solar panel to work? Do I have to kind of, drop the transmission and, give it a new head gasket and all sorts of like treatments and cleaning? And what do you have to do to make a solar panel usable again?
Wow. I think I'm at a loss for words because I think you just covered all the concerns that most people have. One of the, as you know, as you would go into a secondary market to buy a pre-owned certified vehicle, right? We've all done it. Or let's take a different conversation. How many of us own secondhand homes? It's not like we're building brand new homes. We're buying someone else's home. With the proper testing, with the proper process to identify the quality of that panel, you can rest assured whether it's through a secondary market reseller. Some of the e-commerce sites now that are popping up and folks are selling this material, it's credible. They're testing, they're doing their verification on this material, and it works just as well as its counterpart, the new product.
And you're saying testing, but you're not saying any refurbishment or cleaning or resurfacing or any kind of work. Are you saying that basically you take a solar panel off of the solar farm and then you can just plug it in anywhere because it's just a solar panel?
I'd like to think that's that simple. Our process is a little more thorough. I would say that we do have to go into that refurbishment process, and some of it is as simple as just identifying from a cosmetic standpoint, will this qualify for that specific need? And in some cases, and I'll use some of the lower watt material, anything is feasible when it comes to repair and refurbishment. But would you, and I'll use a car for example, would you do a full overhaul on a car that has 300,000 miles? You may not do that. And so it has its own home, and that car makes it overseas, and someone says, hey, labor is cheap here, and I may decide to make those upgrades and paint it nice and shiny. In the case of what we do and what the industry is seeing, some of this material, most of it goes in and it does get fully refurbished, tested, cleaned, and then it makes it to your doorstep where you're building that carport.
Now, the big pushback to solar that I've heard a lot of people say is, when these things break, they got to throw them in the landfills, and then they leach out toxic chemicals, and the world goes to hell. And I'm like, okay, well, can't you recycle them? And then, of course, you guys came along. So tell me what happens to those panels that are in bad shape. Maybe a hurricane hit, or maybe they got, something dropped on them. What happens to those panels?
Great question. Look, one person's trash is another person's treasure. One of the things that we look to do at every turn is squeeze out as much value as possible. So you do have scenarios where these natural catastrophes happen, and we're not going to pretend they don't. They do. Hailstorms, brush fires, where at that point, there is a point of no return. You cannot refurbish this product. It doesn't make sense. Where we come in is we look to dismantle, to deconstruct that panel, and now get the raw commodities. So you have glass, you have aluminum, you have copper, you have silver, you have different commodities that have a value within the value chain.
And so I think that a lot of people, we like to think that recycling is either this shiny building where stuff goes in and the exact same stuff comes out, and we're like, that's recycling. And then there's those of us who have done the research and found out that no, your plastic bottles don't, they go into the recycling facility, but then they fall through the cracks and they get thrown away in the trash, and you could have just thrown them in the trash to begin with. And we go oh no. So, where in between the two extremes are you? Are you guys kind of stuck, kind of crushing up these panels and then sending that waste somewhere for people to kind of pick through to find the copper and all the precious stuff? Or are we closer to, getting nice, usable material out at the other end?
So great question. One of the things that we look to do, and early on, our goal was to build a viable business and build in vertical integration. So what that means for our industry, what we're doing is reuse is at that first turn. But once it gets down to recycling, we still have valuable commodities that are there that in today's market are needed. One lesson, again, going back to COVID, that we all learn is supply chain is not healthy within the US. We felt it. One of the things that we're seeing from a policy standpoint is an administration right now that is pushing for the US to be independent. Now, what does that look like? Assuming with all there's about 500 million panels installed in the US today. They anticipate 21% increase from that 500 million. So the independence that we're looking to get from renewable energy is we're just at the forefront. And at some point, that supply chain, that is jobs, factories, products that are going to be assembled here in the US, they're going to require raw commodities, glass, aluminum. How great would that be if we could supply that right here and right now?
So that way, if another container ship decides to take a left turn in a canal somewhere, it's not like, oh, no more of that. And you're like, oh no, my thing that I wanted. And it's like, well, we can't make it because that stuff was coming from China, and they have to go around South America. And you're like, crap.
Correct. So I love that point, and to talk to it. We're seeing what is a renewable energy revolution. That renewable energy revolution that's happened has opened new markets. You brought up the example of the carport. We find so many people sending us images, videos of how they've outfitted a school bus with solar panels. COVID has taught them you can work from home. You're in marketing, great. I met a couple just a few months ago that was traveling the US in a makeshift school bus that was retrofitted with all stainless steel appliances with solar panels. You're giving independence to people that didn't have it. Where you can provide energy and where you can provide resources, you're going to quickly find out that it's going to change customer spending. It's going to change where people live, where people work. And so, I know it sounds like a broken record, and I was having this conversation with our guys. I am so excited to be part of that, to give that back and be part of that solution. And so it's exciting. It's an exciting part of what we do.
And to jump into that, Zach and I have been working on our solar-powered trailer. So just 6 yards that way is a completely off-grid, air-conditioned room that we can drag around anywhere we want and completely run anything. We could run a dryer if we needed to, or a welder. And it's like, it wasn't all that hard. Like, I didn't feel like we had to learn rocket science in order to be able to kind of accomplish something like that. And I feel like we're very, very early in this process where everyone is going to suddenly have this brand new set of skills where instead of, electricity being this dark art that you have to, hire a wizard to do for you, it's going to be something that's a little bit more approachable. And to get back to what Zach said, I mean, we bought some used solar panels the other day for cheaper by square footage than plywood, right? So like construction material plywood that, as a roof, isn't a good roof. Plywood is not good roofing material. You have to get an underlayment, and then you have to get some shingles and some other roofing material and the glue and flashing and all this stuff to make a roof, which is going to cost vastly more than literally per square foot the solar panels that we could build a roof with.
And plywood doesn't make electricity.
Exactly. And that's the crazy part to me, is that like these materials have gone from being relatively so expensive compared to what they are now, that you're buying something at pennies on the dollar for something that used to cost hundreds of dollars. Now, I think we spent like $50 a panel.
Yep.
For like a panel of this size that generates 250 watts.
And honestly, I thought it was brand new. Like, we found out they were about 10 years old, but they look brand new. They act brand new. I mean, yeah, they're slightly degraded in terms of output from when they were brand new, but like, I couldn't tell the difference.
Right. And this is the exciting part for me, because inverters are getting cheaper. All the other batteries are getting cheaper. Mm-hmm. All the things that you need to be completely energy independent, not as even like a nation, but as like a dude, mm-hmm. right? Not even owning land, because you can, have it on a moving vehicle. It's like you can become so much more independent than you could have ever throughout history. I look at places where they need to install a light somewhere on a road, and you look and there has to be a box with a meter on it, and there's a whole thing just to get 110 volts to a little light that flashes, and I'm going like, my God,
a little panel would do that.
Right? It gets me thinking, because I've been doing this work and because I've been learning about solar, and then to hear you and you're like, oh yeah, somebody called us the other day and they have all these panels they want to get rid of. And I'm going like, oh my gosh.
This seems like the early days of hot rodding, when, in the 30s and 40s, when cars were starting to be mass manufactured and people had garages and they're like, hey, we can put a new Hemi, whatever in here, right? And it's like, I feel like now people are going to go, hey, wait a minute, there's so many cool projects I can do.
Well, and right, when Henry Ford was invented the production line, that's not when people were hot rodding. They were waiting until those Model Ts and Model As and Model Bs were starting to become less and less valuable, right? And so that the average person could actually afford them, start to tinker with them, start to learn how to do it.
Right.
Because, back in 1915, not everybody, knew how to work on an engine, and all of this kind of culture hadn't developed yet. Now I feel like we're getting to the point with solar panels and batteries and motors and electric and inverters where people are going to be able to start to do this themselves, much like kind of the hot rodding community of yesteryear.
Yeah, and hot rodders didn't have YouTube.
Exactly.
Wow, so that's a very interesting point that you bring up.
Yeah, I'm just so excited that you are in this business. You don't recycle like a tiny amount, by the way. So if you guys watching, don't you recycle something like a quarter of all the solar panels in this country?
Yeah. So as it stands, we've processed about 500,000 panels. We will be on pace, hopefully, to hit that million mark. That's 340 for just to put in perspective, 345,000 pounds in a given day, 69 million pounds in a year. That's just one facility.
Wow.
So how did you get into this? How did this business start? Is it only because today like you said, there are so many panels, we couldn't have really started a business like this, say 10 or 20 years ago?
I think first, like any other business, any other entrepreneur, the question that comes up is there's got to be a better way. Looking at the landscape, looking at how fast this industry was growing from an installation standpoint, and realizing there's no end of life planning. And from the previous life that I had, being involved in returns management, reverse logistics, and e-waste, this was that problem back then. And looking at how this industry and where it was headed and how it was forming, we said there's got to be a better way. Someone needs to come up with a solution, and it took us nearly 3 years with supply chain woes and getting some of this proprietary machinery set up and process, and to go from pilot scale to full scale, it was a challenge, but we got there, and I'm very proud of the team that got it done.
I want to talk a little bit about the process of, a truck arrives loaded with solar panels, I'm assuming, and you have a guy with a forklift, starting to bring them into the facility. What are some of the steps that, take place in order to either refurbish and reuse, or decide that one is too far gone and needs to be recycled, and then further, how do you recycle it?
Right. So first and foremost, as the material comes in, there's a whole process just how to receive trucks. We typically have inbound, outbound reports. We know what's coming in. We know the conditions. But in the event that it's a sort and settle and we really don't know, that material goes through our different lines. It gets evaluated first and foremost off cosmetics, and then it goes into evaluation. If something is deemed refurbishable, do we send it to the refurbishing line to then test, upgrade the panel? And then you look at the material that frankly doesn't meet that qualification. It won't meet your needs and your demands, and therefore it then goes to a recycling line. That line, as that it comes through triage, it starts to get dismantled and the frame comes off. It then you start to go through secondary machinery that, with mechanical action, then takes apart other parts of that solar panel, to the point where you get the raw commodities: glass, aluminum, copper. And what you're able to do then is, once you separate those things, there's a second area of within the supply chain that it goes into. So there are buyers that will exclusively buy aluminum, and it will go to a secondary processing facility. It will then get melted down and repurposed. And the same thing with the glass. One of the great things that we're working on right now is a partnership with a local company that is taking the glass and using it as sandblast mix, which is huge. So there's a lot of steps from the point where the material comes in to when it actually goes into a finished good or down the commodity lines to then be sold into the commodity supply chain.
So I know that in the battery recycling world, there are some companies that are at different stages, right? Some that we visited get the battery down to what's called a black mass, and that black mass is kind of a mixture of a bunch of things. And so some companies can actually take that black mass and then go further steps with it. I'm assuming that you get some of your materials, like you said, you'd get these nice aluminum rails off, which are awesome. You get the glass off. And then I would imagine it's pretty hard, but please tell me if it's not, to take the panel itself, which is all like, I don't even know where you'd begin. Do you just get that down to like a black mass, or is there a way to get some components out of it?
There is. There's still valuable resources there. Again, there's silver, there's copper, there is silicon. And one of the things that we look to do, going back to that point of that black mass, so we're at a 99% recovery rate. Wow. So that 1%, yes, you do get to the point where you need to get that to another processor that may look to use that as a filler mix for other products, whether it's construction material or as feedstock to fire up their kilns, right? So there is that 1%, but it doesn't go to waste, as it does get reutilized in another space, but as basically filler material.
So I think it's important that argument that we've been hearing, at least we've been hearing it for decades, that like, well, these solar can't be recycled. Yes, it can. And just refer them back to this interview so that we've got a company doing it right now. You can go visit them, I'm sure. And, so that is just a bogus argument right now, right? We've moved past that.
Right.
Well, and I guess the question is, at some point, somebody made a solar panel, and obviously there wasn't somebody who is like, I can recycle that for you,
right?
Because that's not how we do things as humans. We make something, and then we have to make enough of it and, use it up or whatever we're going to do with it to
get to
the point where somebody's going to go, I know what to do with that stuff. Oh, you've made so many millions of plastic bottles. I know how to recycle that stuff. Or whatever it is, to say like, I know how to safely dispose of this, or to, in this case, recycle it, which is really awesome.
So when do we get to the point where we can almost be a closed loop?
I think as first and foremost, I think it starts with the design process. A lot of times we look to solve a problem, but if we look at the core reason as to how we got there, it's going to be some collaboration with the manufacturers into designing more sustainable products. They make a great promise. I mean, a great product rather. Solar made a promise. It needs to keep that promise of making a sustainable green product, and end of life is part of that discussion. I think the volumes, as they continue to grow and we start seeing the tsunami of products that from an end of life standpoint, you're going to now look at taking that and injecting it back into this direct supply chain for solar. And one of the things that's very encouraging for us, and I'm extremely excited about, is billions and billions of dollars that are being invested in the US today with manufacturing in the EV space, with manufacturing in the solar space. So that is going to be the feedstock. That is going to be a relationship that is a two-way street. We will then look to get this material back and into their feedstock of raw materials needed to create new materials. And so you're going to see several different businesses, industries formed from this very space, which is very exciting.
Jesse mentioned earlier that if I was a utility solar farm and I got to the point where I was like, hey, I'm going to go buy new panels, that I would get rid of my old panels. I'm assuming that's where most of your supply comes from, right? Are just big utility scale panels. I'm assuming it's not as many like just homeowners getting rid of 10 panels off the roof.
Correct. We service utility clients, developers, really large scale commercial asset owners. So it's not geared up for residential. But I do think through some collaboration, some additional ways of working with the industry, we may be able to set up a network where those same installers that are looking to do this work can then be collection points and collect that material. And once it gets to larger volumes like truckloads, they can work with companies like us. And also that lessens the footprint, the carbon footprint, right? So larger volumes for truckloads, that will also help the cause.
And what's your forecast going forward for getting panels from utilities? Because I'm assuming it has something to do with how quickly the industry comes up with more efficient panels. Like, so as they come up with more efficient panels, do you see, they just came up with a new panel, so now I'm seeing orders for old panels coming in?
Although that's part of the conversation, I think the bigger conversation is climate change, the brush fires, the hailstorms, right? Hurricanes. I think what will happen is we'll start to see that those things happen, and as we look at the issue at hand, that's part of the conversation. The upgrades do happen, yes. You do have damage that does happen through environmental issues, but more importantly, we're seeing also manufacturing waste, right? They're creating things. There's problems. They can't warranty it. They need to then be recycled. So I wish it was one answer, but it's several that contribute to what we're doing and how we're obtaining all this material. 500 million panels that are installed in the U.S. today. So there's quite a bit, and that number is growing because, as you mentioned, for the first time in history, solar components are cheaper in the U.S. than their counterparts overseas. So that starts to tell you the story. We're catching up, and we're catching up very quickly.
So how much did the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, and other similar federal acts that have passed recently, how much have they affected your industry?
Oh, tremendously. We're seeing a surge, very much that you're seeing a surge right now within EVs. When you have incentives in place that incentivize the consumer to make purchases, there's credits. It will definitely push that industry forward.
Now, you guys are in Yuma, Arizona. I assume it's strategic because the Southwest is just full of solar. Whereas, here in the Northeast, I mean, we do have plenty of solar, but it's not, the farm size isn't as big. Are you getting most of your panels from in your region?
We're seeing that from all over. We started here. The plant is based here, pilot scale to full scale, but we are servicing the entire U.S. In fact, we have different consolidation locations throughout the U.S. We do have one actually in the Northeast in Hackettstown, New Jersey. So they're out there. I mean, we have plenty of points where we collect the material.
Now, on the demand side, we talked about how we're doing our own little projects and stuff. We bought like a pallet of 25 panels, but I assume that the demand is coming from somewhere else in terms of scale. Is it utilities? Is it like who's using these panels, these used panels?
So a lot of the driving force, obviously the off-grid community, one of which is very close to actually Yuma, Quartzsite. There was a movie that was made, Nomadland, that I think won the Oscar. I couldn't believe how many folks were in that community. Tens of thousands with RVs coming there, and now they are living completely off-grid. So within the U.S., there's folks like yourself that are dabbling in the space and saying, hey, let me try this out. First, I'll start with my shed. I'll heat my pool. Then it kind of escalates to other areas. Now, they may have full systems, but within some of the used modules that we're seeing, especially with the lower watt panels that we are not utilizing in the States, these are developing countries. These are folks that are looking at farming, and they need to get the water supply from a water pump that needs power in remote areas. And instead of using diesel fuel, they're putting up solar panels. They're able to feed their crops. And so it's opening up other conversations. It's opening up other industries. It's making other things possible. So they're able to work on different parts of the landscape and feed communities. So the conversation is really insane. I mean, I've had conversations with people in Turkey, all across the world, that are saying, hey, we are going to change the way of where people live, how they live. But back to your point, a lot of this material then also makes its way to community solar. And with less and less regulations overseas, that's done more frequently.
So in terms of where you're at as a company, there's lots of companies that need a lot of venture capital to start, and they need a lot of runway to keep going before they actually get to generate revenue. Can you kind of explain to us where you're at as a company?
Absolutely. So currently right now, we bootstrapped this. We've gotten it to where we needed to get it to, and we're self-funded. But we do see the needs of going to the market and saying we need additional capital to expand. How do we put additional centers, collection centers or processing centers throughout the country to meet the ever-growing demand? And at some point, yes, we will probably look into doing that. But in the interim, yes, to answer that question, it is very capital intensive. We're talking about machines, and we're talking about labor, and we're talking about all of it, and it all costs a lot of money.
Well, I mean, how funny that for such a high-tech, new age, recycling solar panels sounds so futuristic. You'd think that you'd be, how old-fashioned to be self-funded. Good for you guys.
I know.
Oh my gosh,
That's awesome.
Yeah, I ask myself that question all the time. But what's beautiful about this country and entrepreneurship as a whole is you figure it out. You grind away and you use your resources and I think our team is resilient. We've done it, but I'm sure we'll ask for help here shortly to make sure that we fulfill our promise and continue to service the industry.
So people who are watching now, because we're talking to a big group of people who are investors in the space, and disruptive investing is what we're talking about, and what you guys are doing is disruptive. Would there be a point you think that you might crowdfund, or that you might go public so that, kind of the average investor can get involved? Or do you think you're probably going to stay private for quite some time?
I think that conversation, we're having that conversation right now, as we are being called upon from manufacturers, developers. And frankly, I see that if policy were to change and things advance, the government may ask us for help. And in that conversation, yes, more capital is going to be needed. So not all money is good money, I like to say. And so one of the things is, yes, having that alignment, being able to partner with individuals or organizations that have that same passion, that have the same drive and understanding of this end goal. What are we looking to do? This is a huge problem, and we got to figure it out.
Adam, I'm so glad that you got into this business. I'm so glad you're doing what you're doing, because I think that this is a totally necessary business, and I think that we're going to be really glad we have it here in the United States instead of, I can imagine a reality where we have to ship these panels to some other part of the world to get taken care of. It's really nice to know that they're getting taken care of right here.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for telling the story, and thank you for your support.
Thank you so much, Adam. This was a lot of fun.